Without a doubt, we live in difficult times. And it's in times like this that we need inspiration. We need God to speak to us and reaffirm the purpose of life, humanity, the purpose of our very life. Why are we alive now, and why should we get out of bed today? And the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon, the preacher, the son of David, gives us the meaning of life. Let's delve into it together. We are just beginning looking at Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes can be found in the Old Testament wisdom literature between Proverbs and Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. And last video we looked at verse 2, the theme verse for the 12 chapters. And we're going to look at verse 3 now. And these videos are going to get longer and more complicated as we're dealing with larger texts, but we're just slipping into it gently. Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. This is what it says in the New American Standard Version. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. That's verse 1. That's who's writing it. Verse 2, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. So that's the theme statement, the topic sentence. Now verse 3. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? Verse 3 is called the research question. King Solomon in Jerusalem is researching the purpose of life. And so while verse 1 tells us who's doing it, and verse 2 tells us the topic sentence, the theme statement, if you will, verse 3 has the research question. What advantage does man have in all his work which is under the sun? This research question defines Solomon's experiments throughout Ecclesiastes. What is the profit to life's toil? What advantage exists? The key to this verse and to the entire book of Ecclesiastes is the expression, the phrase, under the sun. Under the sun is used all throughout Ecclesiastes. Here in verse 3, in verse 9, in verse 14. When you get to chapter 2, it's used in chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Chapter 2, verses 20, 21, and 22. In chapter 3, it's used in verse 16. Chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3. And chapter 4, verse 7. You can look in chapter 5 Ecclesiastes and find it in 13. And in chapter 6, it's used twice. In chapter 8, it's used twice. In chapter 9, it's used 3 times. And it's even used in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 5. It's all over the place. Under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. And under the sun is just crucial to our study of Ecclesiastes. Under the sun explains the assessment as horizontal of living life on planet Earth, people to people, without God. Under the sun, horizontal. The experiment's perspective is, to use a big old college word, anthrocentric. It's viewed from our small perspective, viewed from a mortal's point of view. It's very secular, worldly. It's very pragmatic. No sense of the divine or the existential or the big purpose under the sun. The key for understanding Ecclesiastes is this phrase, under the sun. I mentioned in the previous video how there's no common agreement on the outline of the book of Ecclesiastes. The flow of topics don't form a logical outline like we normally do in the English-speaking world or the Western world. And that's because it's not a 1, 2, 3 outline. It's far more a circular discussion. So it approaches the topic of the purpose of life, not in a straight outline of 1, 2, 3, like we would in the West, but it approaches it much more in an Eastern mindset by a circular discussion of talking around the subject. So in chapters 1 and 2, in a circular discussion, Solomon scrutinizes life, wisdom, wealth, and death under the sun without God. And then in chapters 2 through 10, he re-examines them, the same topics, with the addition of God. See that? He constantly comes back to the same idea. First it's without God, then it's with God. And then finally, in chapters 11 and 12, the end of the book, life is about faith, wisdom is a lesson to be learned, wealth is for enjoyment, and death provides context for judgment and accountability. So you have this circular discussion, which confuses most of us in the West. So under the sun, Ecclesiastes has this research question, this question that needs to be answered. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? We would say, we'd get to the point. We'd say, what is life's secret? Living only under the sun without God is empty and meaningless. That's life's secret. Living without God is empty and meaningless. Living only has value in the framework of God, eternity, judgment, and accountability. It requires that context. Go, live, fear God, and obey God, because judgment and accountability follow after death. That is life's secret. This topic is incredibly important, and we need time to think about the purpose of our individual lives. Why do I exist? And how can I make the most of the time that God has given me? If you're interested in delving into Ecclesiastes deeper, then I wrote a book in 2018. It's 50 pages. It's $1.98 on Amazon. It's for a Kindle, an e-reader, and it's called Search for Significance, an examination of Ecclesiastes. And I will put the link to this book on Amazon in the description below as an additional resource for you if you wish.